Hello, Jeff Livingston again with the Hawaiian Railway. I serve as the historian, and I hope that the series of programs we're doing that you find interesting. If you have any suggestions or something that in particular you'd like to find out about, please let us know. You can email me at historian@hawaiianrailway.com, and I'd be happy to make contact with you. The Society started its operations at Naval Magazine Lu'u'u'ulei, working on Wailua Agriculture Company number 6. And shortly after that, in 1974, the Navy ceased railroad operations at Lu'u'u'ulei. Most of the equipment was sold, some was retained. But in 1970, in the engine house at Lu'u'u'ulei, there were these 4 locomotives that are clearly visible. 65-00302 is in the very front, and behind it, those 2 locomotives and the one to its left are 65-ton Whitcombs, but unfortunately we can't make out the numbers. As the entire system wound down, 2 of those large 65-ton locomotives were sold, and they went off to do other jobs on the mainland. But how did they get here? The Whitcomb Locomotive Company was located in Rochelle, and they built a huge number of military locomotives. One of the most famous was another 65-ton locomotive that was the first one to cross the Rhine in World War II. 3 narrow gauge examples were sent to Hawaii, and these are the only 3 narrow gauge that were ever built. On its arrival, you can still see the welded rings on the side frames that secured it as cargo when it came over, and it was all sealed up. All 3 of these locomotives were assigned to Naval Magazine Lu'u'u'ulei. Now, they were numbered NAD 10, 11, and 12. We don't know which of them was which, but we do have in the archives a picture of one of the locomotives, number 11. Now, from the picture, the locomotive appears black. We really don't know if it was black or if it was a dark gray. But this picture would have been taken probably shortly after the end of the war, since they arrived in late 1944. This is the heaviest locomotive, military locomotive, that was in use in Hawaii. And it did yeoman service at Lu'u'u'ulei for a number of years, and even went so far as to pull trains into Westlock, and I believe at one point may have gone all the way to Pearl Harbor. In this photograph, the locomotive appears blue, but because of the age of the photograph and the blue shift that occurs, we know the car behind it was gray, so I suspect that the locomotive was also gray. If anyone has a memory of this as to the colors, please let us know. This is locomotive 174, 65-00174. It's important because it is part of the Hawaiian Railway Society collection. It was donated by the Navy to the Society, excuse me, and had to be moved from Lu'u'u'ulei to our yard in Ewa. At the time it was being moved, the track crews had already removed most of the track within Lu'u'u'ulei and it was all sold for scrap. So 174 had to be lifted, placed on a truck, and trucked over to every yard. This was done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as a community service project, for which we could never thank them enough. Once on the flatbed, it was delivered to the yard and literally pushed off the back of the truck onto a set of rails that had been temporarily laid just to receive it. HRS was blessed with a large donation of military equipment early on in its history. This equipment was a blessing in that it was saved and could be used, but it was also somewhat of a curse, because as a fairly new organization starting out and being totally involved in the restoration of Waco 6, and then having to move and create the every yard facility off of the ORNL main line, material and money and people were in short supply. 174 was kind of neglected for a while. It was used cannibalized for spare injectors for the other locomotives, brake cylinders and air tanks to get Waco 6 functioning properly to pull passengers, and became somewhat derelict. Although she didn't look too bad, she wouldn't run, hadn't run, and there was some talk about just scrapping the locomotive. It was just too much to handle. Fortunately, a Canadian gentleman, Mike Lloyd, who would come to visit the railroad on a regular basis annually, was also an experienced railroader, and decided, well, why can't it run? A little later in the program, we're going to talk about another locomotive, 7750, and that's the locomotive that we used. We pulled it up alongside 174, ran jumper cables over from 7750 to the contacts on 174, and we got one of the engines to roll over. And when it did, the air compressor actually started making air. So this locomotive was in no way, shape, or form ready for the scrapyard. It could be saved. Over the next couple of years, Mike worked with myself and our caretaker at the time, Lou Hoft, and we changed the injectors, we got fuel to it, we cleaned up the exhaust system somewhat to get the engine ready to fire. It finally did, and it was partially in the shed. And the first time it fired up, it blew so much black smoke and soot and dust and rust and everything else over the thing, you couldn't see more than 6 feet in front of yourself. But you could see white eyes and smiling faces. So 174 entered its first period of actual restoration. The locomotive was disassembled. The engines were not removed, they were repaired in place. The cab cleaned, the trucks worked on, the air tanks hydro tested to make this a safe running locomotive. The air system had to be cleaned. The electrical system required some significant repairs, but overall 174 roared back to life. And the original intention was to put her in a gray paint scheme. This is her first run pulling the train. She's not been lettered. She's in the navy gray that we had chosen for it. And this was done by a restoration plan. So we would have a locomotive that reflected what it looked like during its service time in Hawaii. Currently, 174 has been repainted yellow with the Hawaiian Railway symbols on it. But I hope to redo the restoration plan and return her to a more conventional appearance when she was actually operating on Oahu. The 245-ton locomotives that we use routinely for the train would remain Hawaiian Railway. But I don't think there's any question, if you see a train, it's the Hawaiian Railway. So 174 is the largest of our 4 diesel locomotives at the yard. It's significant because it's the largest. It's also significant because that locomotive pulled the last ammunition train between Lu'u'u'ulei and Westlock. So definitely a piece of history worth saving. For those of you that have been out to the yard or have seen other bits and pieces of these programs, you know we have 2 45-ton Whitcombs. These are also built in 1944, narrow gauge, and donated by the Navy. But they didn't start out at Lu'u'u'ulei or Westlock. DRTC 3, that's District Rail Transportation Coordinator, was a Navy group that was stood up to help the freight flow during the Second World War. Cars would be moved from place to place. They'd be left empty someplace where they were needed somewhere else. And the Navy kind of took charge of all of the military bases, and working with the ORNL was able to keep the freight flowing faster and more efficiently. Well, the DRTC, obviously following the war, was disbanded. But these locomotives and many more DRTC locomotives were then sent to their various Navy bases where they worked consistently. And around 1949, 1950, the Navy changed their numbering system for their locomotives. So DRTC 3 became USN 6500302, the same way that NAD 10, 11, or 12, we don't know which one, became 65-00174. So this photograph is in her colors from around 1949, 1950. The Navy had started painting all the locomotives at that time yellow. There were a few holdouts, fortunately, that remained gray for a little while. 302 was among the locomotives donated to the Hawaiian Railway Society and was placed in operation. This has been our workhorse since the beginning. It ran when nothing else would. 302 pulled the first passenger trains. It pulled the work train. It made the first scheduled trips, for railfan trips for the Society. And she continues to do that today. Now, getting her out of Lu'u'u'ulei, like 174, was a bit difficult. I mentioned that the tracks had been removed. And this is the clearest indication. This is 302 sitting in the engine house, which was actually called a roundhouse, even though it wasn't. And there are no tracks. We had to dig, or the Society, not we, I wasn't around, had to dig a pit in front of the engine so that the truck could back in and get low enough that the locomotive could be pulled onto the truck and delivered to the Eva yard. 302, being one of our first, was originally painted in a color similar to the ORNL locomotives, with the blue and the silver. In this case, more blue and white. And it carries a name. Now, none of these locomotives ever carried a name, but John Knaus, who was the founder and driving force behind the Oahu Railway and Land Company, had passed away, and 302 was named in his honor. So just to the right of the window, you can see the small writing there that honors Mr. Knaus. And that will remain on that locomotive indefinitely. Well, anything mechanical needs repair, and 302 is obviously no exception. We got our new engine shed built, and 302 needed repairs to the trucks. The traction motors, the gearboxes, all rest underneath there. They were getting tired. They needed attention. So what do? You jack up a 45-ton locomotive high enough that you can get a forklift underneath and pull the truck out. This is just one of the overhauls that we have had to accomplish on these locomotives. Now keep in mind, they are approaching 85 years of age, and they run consistently, and they require maintenance consistently also. So if you've got nothing to do on a weekday afternoon, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Friday, come on out. You can help us do some maintenance. 302 was sent off to the mainland for overhaul. The contractor that did the overhaul failed miserably to deliver a quality product. So after a unfortunate expenditure of funds, 302 came back with a paint job that looks pretty good from a distance, but you notice that there's no trucks underneath it, just like in the previous picture. They had been reassembled incorrectly and had to be removed and reassembled, repaired, and then put back in place. During this time period, the locomotive was also totally rewired to correct faults that had not been corrected by the contractor. I am happy to say that we were successful, and 302 is back fully in commission and running like a champ. The few little glitches every now and then are to be expected, but it has really been and continues to be the workhorse of the railroad. We have a second 45-ton. Looks identical, painted differently, and a different locomotive. It began life as DRTC number 8. Now you notice that there's ORNL cars in the background in this photograph. DRTC 8 was actually rented by the Oahu Railway and Land Company for a time and used at the Honolulu yard as a switch engine. This was during a time when the ORNL's equipment was getting just worn out and they needed a little help. At various times, the ORNL also rented other military equipment for use in Honolulu. Never on a mainline run, but always in the yard. The 423 did not have a career at Lu'u'u'ulei. 423 was assigned to Naval Ammunition Depot, Westlock. And she remained there to the very end. And here's an excellent photograph of her. She's operating on the Whiskey Pier, or Whiskey Wharf. And this is in 1957. Servicing the ships that came alongside to load or offload ammunition, traveling to and from the bunkers. This was the only locomotive assigned to Westlock, and it remained there Unfortunately, it became excess when the operations at ʻŌlelo ended. And just another quick photograph. This is 423 again. You can see a what appears to be either a jeep carrier or aircraft carrier behind her and a tugboat outboard of her. So she was a waterfront girl that moved up and down with a clarity. We were very fortunate to find these pictures because it's most unusual to get pictures taken on base at any time and virtually impossible nowadays. So 423 was resting comfortably in the engine shed at ʻŌlelo, or at Westlock, I'm sorry. And it was fired up and limped out of the shed to be recovered by the Hawaiian Railway Society. She ran, but she was running very poorly at this point. We did get her out, and the guys inadvertently derailed it, getting it out, which caused a great deal of consternation. But they were successful in getting it back on the rails, getting it back up onto a truck, and getting it to the Ewa yard. Once at the Ewa yard, 423 commenced an overhaul, and it didn't look very pretty. But because of the problems that she already had, it required an extensive amount of work to get her operational again. And this is all at the same time that 302 has to be kept running, passenger cars have to be built, the yard has to be expanded. So there was very little time really to concentrate on one particular project. Eventually she was put back together, and prior to her paint job was at least complete, although not very pretty. Shortly after this picture though, things got moving in high gear, and 423 received the Hawaiian Railway lettering, but a green paint job. And you'll notice a name on this one also, Richard Marshall. Dick, lovingly referred to as Papa Dick, was a major mover of the Hawaiian Railway Society, and we honor his memory by naming this locomotive after him. Unfortunately, this is 302 today. You notice there's something missing. Traction motor problem put the locomotive out of commission, and it's being repaired as we speak. The gearbox should be back together by the end of the week, and hopefully we'll have it up and running by the end of June. Excuse me. Our smallest locomotive is also our oldest locomotive. This is a 25-ton General Electric locomotive that was used by the Army. This is the only Army locomotive in our collection. Its number is 7750, and the USATT, United States Army Transportation Terminal. This locomotive operated on isolated trackage down at Pier 41. When the Army donated the locomotive to the Society, it also donated all those flat cars that are in front of it, but that's for another topic. 7750 was operational and remains operational. She was moved to ʻŌlelo from Pier 40, along with all of the flat cars, and is the only bicentennial locomotive that the HRS put together. She was probably up there trucking along the Navy trackage. This little locomotive has been a workhorse also. We used it extensively to haul the work train. We use it as a breakdown locomotive if one of the other locomotives gets stranded. Just last weekend, we had the track crew got stranded. The speeder wouldn't start, and 7750 fired up and went to the rescue. Like all the locomotives, some heavy-duty maintenance is required. We do this on a fairly routine basis, not because we break it, but because it's old equipment and it has difficulty. In this photo, we have actually lifted the locomotive up into the air and removed the wheels and the traction motor. And 7750 is a chain drive locomotive. So one axle has the motor on it, and then there's a chain that goes up to the other axle. She's recently finally got some more lettering. This lettering was installed just a matter of 3 weeks ago, and we have since determined that it is probably incorrect in that the font is not what would have been used at the time period, and the color of the Transportation Corps logo may be incorrect. We are working with the U.S. Army Transportation Corps Museum to determine what the correct sizes, fonts, and shapes of all of this. So 7750 will hopefully be restored to her original operating appearance when we received it from the Army. So that's our 4 diesel locomotives, and those are the mover and shakers for the passenger trains. If you have any questions, please email me, historian@hawaiianrailway.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to answer any questions, and if I don't have the answer, I will definitely do the research and find the answer if it's out there somewhere. I love researching. I love finding out answers.